When I was a teenager, my parents owned two homes, the main home and a smaller one that they rented out. They were really close to each other, just a couple of blocks away. In fact, we lived in a mid sized Midwestern city and in a nice neighborhood. So both houses were nice. I'm telling this from my perspective how things were back then, which was around 10 years ago or so. I grew up in this house and really enjoyed living in the neighborhood. Eventually, the people who were renting out the second home moved out, and the house was going to be vacant. It wasn't going to be put up for rent, but I didn't know that at the time, one of my uncles was going through some marriage problems, and my family all knew about it. My uncle was really a great guy. He and his wife had two kids who were in elementary school. Both he and his wife were very successful, but his wife had filed for divorce, I believe, and kicked my uncle out of the house. She was the one behaving worse than my uncle, but his kids were siding with her for whatever reason. My uncle was very sad and confused. He got an apartment for the time being, which was on the smaller side. One day, my mom and dad both went to stay with him for a few days. I believe it was a weekend, and they went with several family members. I think they just went to support my uncle and cheer him up a little bit or help him with whatever he needed while they were gone. I stayed in our house because I had to work that weekend to make things easier for me. I told my parents that I would sleep in the rental house, which was only a couple of blocks away. Reason being, two cats who were going to stay back at our home. I told my parents that they could stay there, and I would just check in when I needed to. It made sense to me because my cats would sometimes wake me up in it the night for attention, and I needed to wake up early for work. Also, my parents told me that they didn't know if they would be back the next day or the day after, so they might need to stay another night, and I would just have to sleep in the rental house again. I didn't mind. Both of them were really nice. They both had beds and running water, etc. So the plan was for me to go to work, then come home, check in and feed the cats if they needed it, and then sleep in the other house. It was a Sunday and the first night that everybody was gone. I got home pretty late. I went inside the house and saw things were just like normal. The two cats that our family had were there as always. I did a couple of small chores and then used the bathroom and made myself my way over to the rental house. It was now getting pretty late, so I knew that I would be going to sleep right away. When I got there, I opened the door and let myself inside. It was a smaller home. It had two bedrooms and one bathroom, plus a kitchen and family room. When I went inside, I realized that I had forgot my phone. I still had my keys and everything, but my phone was back at the house. I was too lazy to go back and get it. I remembered to myself that neither of my parents or anybody would be contacting me over the next 24 hours or so. So it was all right. I walked over to one of the bedrooms and got ready to go to sleep. As I did, I left a small bathroom light on with the door cracked open. I didn't live in this house day to day, and I just felt better having a little bit of light on. I fell asleep quickly since it was so late, but very suddenly, in the middle of the night, I woke up. I didn't know why at first, but I realized it was to a noise. I looked at the bedroom doorway, and above the bed, the bedroom door was mostly shut, but I could barely see the kitchen light, which was now on. If the light had been on previously, it wouldn't have had caught my attention. I didn't know if my parents had wanted the kitchen light to be on when I left. Maybe it was on. I was a little tired and didn't notice. Maybe the wind or something had blown open the window and turned on the light. Then I heard some footsteps walk away. They sounded like they were going back and forth across the house. I was confused and had no idea who it could be. My heart then started pounding. I remained in the bed for a few minutes. Things began to settle down, and it was quiet. Then, all of a sudden, I heard the sound of the back door shutting. Whoever was in here had left. I stood up and then walked to the bedroom door and looked out. Sure enough, the light was on in the kitchen. I had no explanation as to who it could be, but I was glad that they had left. I figured that they wouldn't be coming back. I was still confused at who that could have been, though my first thought was perhaps my family came back early and my sister was sleeping there, but that just didn't make any sense at all. Too many things would have to occur for that to happen. I decided to just go back to sleep and figure it out in the morning. If I heard anything else, I would leave the house and get my phone back, then call the police, but I never heard anything more, and I fell back asleep. The next morning was dark and rainy. As I got up and left to leave the house for work, I let myself out of the front door. That's when I saw something sitting on the front porch. It was both of my cat, and we wrapped up in a blanket. I picked it up. It was still dry. Surprisingly, I was so confused and drove back to my parents' house. My family doesn't have any enemies or anything like that. It just didn't make sense who would enter the house and then wrap the cats up in a blanket and put them on the other porch. I drove back and saw that the house was still secure. Nothing was out of the ordinary, except that the back door was not locked. It was shut, and that's when I realized that whoever entered must have gone through. There, I wrapped the cats back up in the blanket and returned them to the house. I made sure everything was locked, and then went to work that day. When I got out of work, I was back at my parents' house. They actually returned home later that day. When they did, I told my mom for the first time what had happened. When I got to the part about the cats being left on the porch, she seemed kind of quiet. She eventually told me that she had a pretty good idea who it was. She told me that she had heard stories of my uncle taking in stray cats before, and once leaving a kitty on somebody's porch when he was younger. That was all a long time ago, though apparently my grandma, his mother, was a cat lover, and he was raised around them. My mom said that she would ask him how to enter the house, though neither of us knew the answer. A day or two later, she did, and my uncle admitted to entering the house, but he claimed he did not remember how or why. He kept saying that he had maybe been dreaming or thought that he was, or something. Remember, he was going through an extremely tough time with the divorce, only I don't know how he would have been able to do what he did while dreaming. I'm not sure if my uncle was being honest or not, if his mind had just broken down, but I guess I'm glad to know that it was him and not some random person. He never really brought it up again, and things are much better with him now. I still wonder what really happened to this day. Your support means a lot. Subscribe and like if you want us to keep sharing these stories. I've loved animals my whole life. I've had a wide-ranging zoo of everything from cats to corn snakes. Combined with the fact that large stretches of my life were spent living in rural areas, it wasn't uncommon for me to have a pretty decent number of animals at a time. A few years ago, I had a roommate. This isn't important to the story, but we were a couple at the time, so things were already hectic in the apartment this was in a small town in the northern Midwest. We had 3 cats, a chow chow, pit bull, mix, a sugar glider, a corn snake, and a hedgehog. Things were already a bit crazy in our modest 2-bedroom apartment. There was one instance where things got out of control over the summer. We had an ant problem, which is pretty common, but with all of the animals, it got especially unmanageable. Around this time, we also found a mom with her kittens outside. She looked to be no older than a year, and we started feeding her and her babies. It took them in temporarily. Yeah, I know, not the best idea in hindsight. It did result in a few weeks of our apartment being an animal-filled hoarder's den, but we didn't care. We fostered the litter of kittens. It really wasn't that big of a deal, and the mess was something that we could handle. Thankfully, with my experience with animals, the task was pretty manageable. Also, we had everything needed, so there was never anything dirty or messy left out of order. Only thing under our control was controlled. The reason I mention this ants episode, though, is because it happened in the midst of all of the animal stuff. One day, we had been finding a couple of kittens had gotten into the cupboards under the kitchen sink. That's where we had been keeping their supply of cat food and milk answer. To develop a small colony under the flooring in the kitchen area, ants had been finding their way to the increased food source and then became attracted to the kitchen, especially in the cupboards under the sink. It turned into a whole thing in the apartment. pretty quickly. The situation was handled quickly and pretty efficiently. That's probably why this didn't happen sooner or get worse. One night, my roommate and I were out somewhere. We get back at some time between 9 to 10. When my roommate went to unlock the door and go inside through the side door, I went around the back to check on things, because I always did. That's when I saw somebody trying to open the back and kitchen windows, which had been slightly cracked. So when I came around the corner and saw this, I was horrified, and still am. I'll never forget the image of some person. I couldn't really tell what they looked like, but they looked as though they were covered in a shine tea greasy layer, like they were a ghost, and reflecting the moonlight as much as their shape and body formed. It was the strangest thing. I basically saw a clear figure in the almost pitch black. I had no good explanation at the time and no other way of describing it. The way he was trying to break into the back windows is something else I'll always remember. He was also moving at supernaturally fast speed. I didn't understand what was happening, and I was almost nothing but disbelief. I did muster the strength to finally say, "Get away from there," from a few yards away. He turned his head at me for like half of a second before he crouched and started running away. I called out to my roommate to come, and she did. I told her what happened, and she was just as confused as I was. Me, though, I was definitely freaked out more. My brain couldn't handle understanding what I had just seen. I was completely lost. We went back inside, and I scanned the entire apartment before coming out to go to bed. I 100% saw what I saw, but tried putting it behind me. I was able to sleep that night. It was the next morning when I was at work. My roommate texted me saying that we had about 20 baby kittens now. Not really, but we did have over 15, number one. I knew this was impossible with us just having one mom nursing her babies. Suddenly, my brain stopped working again. How could a litter of 10 plus kittens just show up in our apartment? The first thing that came to mind was the guy who had been trying to get into the windows. Maybe he had another female cat with kittens outside somewhere. Even that explanation didn't make any sense, though. All of this had transpired to us. We had literally been finding baby kittens scattered around the apartment. Their source didn't make sense. Nothing about the apartment had been touched or breached in any way. The windows and door were still good to where no cat would be able to get through. That could only mean that whoever broke in was still hiding out inside. I ran to my boss and told him I had a family emergency, and I rushed home. When I got there, my roommate was outside the side door. I went inside, and this time knew my apartment had been broken into. It had to have been through either the bathroom window or through one of the windows from the floor up. The only good news was that nobody was still inside. That person was long gone. Even better was that no physical objects or personal belongings had been so trespassed. Actually, everything had been placed carefully back in its location. The only sign of some damage was a couple of our shelves having been knocked down, but then placed back up. The person who did this was just messed up. They also broke into, check, you guessed it, the cupboards back in the kitchen that were under the sinks. Why was somebody trying to break into our apartment to place their babies? They left no note or explanation or a way of contacting them. I still don't believe that there was another mom nursing another litter out there. I just refuse to believe it, even though one day my roommate did spot a lucky, unexplainable glimpse of what looked like a kitten on the neighbor's deck wigs. After this happened, the new kittens were in great health, and everybody was doing great. Enough time had gone by to where I put this entire story behind me. It was too creepy, and I was creeped out enough. It was after I moved out of that apartment and had all of the kittens adopted out too, that I learned something even more horrifying, a story I saw on the internet about baby kittens actually being shown in bulk far more than our situation had been in one den or environment. This was due to a lack of the mom in some cases, and in others, it was too big of a litter for just one mom to handle. I almost threw up when I read the story, just remembering what happened to us. I still don't know what the correlation is, and I realize this theory doesn't explain the whole thing. What happened to us was over 5 years ago, and I don't know what sick monster who do this to kittens or to us, but I try not to think about it or let it stress me out.